Wait for it.
There we
Hey,
go.
what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Live here at Keystroke Medium. I am Josh Hayes here with my co-host Scott Moon, which I can't do this thing on Blab. I'm very sad. And we are here with the author of the Star Brigade series, Cece. I'm going to mess it up again. Icky.
Ekeke.
KK.
Ekeke. All right.
I
How you
got it.
guys
We
doing?
started that off swell and awesome. Should we redo the intro?
No, let's go.
Okay.
It's good. We're rolling.
Welcome.
How you doing?
Scott, this episode was kind of a bonus, like thrown at the last minute, which I'm okay with because I like last minute stuff. You guys touched base with each other because of a science fiction commercial kind of advertising gig
We're doing
that you guys had
we're
going
doing a
on.
promotion this month.
Promotion.
Yeah.
Summer of Science Sci-Fi.
Yes.
Um,
So basically, it's about 13 authors, including myself and Scott. And for one day, it's going to be on July 23rd, a Saturday. We're all going to drop one of our books down to 99 cents, and it's a Facebook event. I think Scott's a host on it. I'm a host on it. And it's aside from just the books, like the authors will be there on the event page to talk to attendees, talk to people who are like, hey, you have a question? Cool, talk to us. And we're also going to post like lots of prizes, giveaways, cool little contests for people, just so it's not just, hey, come buy the book. It's just like there's incentive and there's fun stuff to do. And,
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, and each of the authors, like it's not just, the authors aren't going to be there all day, but what will happen is, well, I'll be there all day. But
Lucky
they'll be
you.
like, I know. But basically the authors will be there and like there's 5 2-hour blocks. So it's like I think Scott's going to be in one of the later ones, but like I'm going to be in one of the middle ones. We got actually in the people we got a lot of really cool people on there. We got Richard Fox, we got Chris Fox, we got Jay Allen, we got Jan Chaney, we got Amy DeBoff, we got Saffron Bryant, and also we're like international because we got some people who are like in Australia. We got some people. I think we got Michael G. Thomas who does like the Star Crusade series.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of really cool, like, just people in the military sci-fi.
That's the coolest thing. I felt really privileged when you asked me to be on that, and that's what I love about writing and writing in this genre in this day and age is
Yeah.
the networking. You know, I've always heard, well, you got to network, and I'm like, then when it happens, you just start meeting people and you have a good time, and I'm looking forward to it. So hopefully it'll be as fun on the Facebook day as the show seems like it's going to be. So.
Yeah, it's definitely it's gonna be a good time, and I think hopefully the authors involved are gonna enjoy it too. It should be good. Like we're getting right now, it's just a matter of like, hey, let's get more attention to it and have people find out about it.
Yeah, it sounds good. Well, I really do appreciate you coming on the show. I know that our scheduling, all of us got a little bit different schedules and demands of life. In addition to writing, I used to be grumpy that I couldn't just sit and write full time all the time. But that kind of makes life interesting. I think it makes writing more interesting. So we usually start out first just to get to know each other and to get to know our audience. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Charles, and your writing, just to kind of get us rolling?
Sure. So for me, I'm basically I'm from the United States, but both my parents aren't. Both my parents are from Nigeria, actually born and raised. They came here in the early 70s, and I've moved around to different parts of the country. I actually lived in the Midwest for about 8 years when I was a kid.
I'm sorry.
Well, I lived in St. Louis. St. Louis is cool, man.
Oh, yeah.
I lived in Atlanta for a couple of years, and then I've lived in Southern California since 1990, and I've also went to school back east in the Northeast. But for me, it's like I've been a science fiction fan all my life, and I think what drove me to kind of write is like I was always creating my own characters, and I used to sketch a lot, but I was always the type of person where I had no interest really in sketching other people's characters. I'm like, I want to sketch my own characters, and I initially wanted to be a comic artist, like way back when, and then I realized, okay, I'm not really that good of a sketcher as I'd like to think, and I hated drawing backgrounds. So it's like the backgrounds would bother me. Yeah. So then I think it was around college. That's when I kind of just got hit with this like boom. I wanted to write. I was just looking through some of my sketches, and I'm like, I got to do something with it. So it took a while to really kind of, okay, what do I want to do? But eventually, like 2005 is when I released the first version, and it was print on demand.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting experience. I learned a lot. I probably
You put in a lot of work at that point. That was the days when you could do it, but you had to be dedicated.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And so, I didn't really set the world on fire, and so even though I'd written another book, I was just like, okay, I don't really want to do print on demand again. And then it was about 2011 when I was just having lunch with a friend of mine, and I was kind of telling him, I don't know what I want to do with this now, even though I still want to do it. And then he's the one who told me about Kindle Direct Publishing, and it was just kind of like I had another epiphany, and I was just like, okay, this is what I want to start doing. So the first thing I did was I revised my first book because I initially was going to release the next book in the series, in the Star Brigade series, but I was just like, you know what? I want to get a clean slate and start again, so people kind of know where to start. So it's not just I'm releasing this book and they're just like, who is this guy? So I did a revision of the first book, and then I re-released it in 2014. And even though I got a lot of good reviews and there's some decent sales, one of the things that I consistently heard from a lot of people is just like, this book is so long. So what I ended up doing this year.
How long was it?
The original version was about 550 pages.
Oh wow.
And yeah, exactly. That's fine if I had an established audience at that point, that's one thing, but it's just I'm still trying to establish an audience, and I'm just like, let me lessen the barrier for entry and just make 2 books. And there's enough content where I could do that. So I split the first book, Brigade Resurgent, into 2 books. The first part is Resurgent, and then the second part is Maelstrom. And then, I'm continuing to write, obviously, and the next book in the series I'm hoping to get out around late August, and that's going to be the 3rd book in the Star Brigade series.
And so how far are you on that?
Well, I'm done.
Oh, okay, sweet.
Yeah, I'm done. What I'm doing right now, stuff I've been working on is I'm working on a novella that kind of takes place right after the 2nd book, and it kind of introduces a new character. And so that's going to be, I'm hoping that will be kind of like, hey, sign up to my mailing list and you get, this novella. So that type of stuff. So currently, and once I finish that, then I'm going to start working on the 4th book. So.
The novella is a great way to get
hey,
people.
Scott,
yeah, I got some.
Your sound is coming not through your headphones, so you need to turn your sound so it goes to your headphones and because that's what's giving us the feedback, I think.
Test.
Oh, now it sounded okay.
That
was his air conditioning.
Sorry. Maybe if I don't talk for a minute, maybe you guys can continue while I figure this out.
It sounds a little better now, actually. That was weird. Because you had an echo there for a minute, but I think it's gone now.
My fault. Okay, how's it now?
It's fine now.
That's good. Yeah, that's
cool. I wonder if I wasn't plugged into my mic that well. So
that's all right. Along. So you mentioned that your first book was 500 and some odd pages. How many words was that? Do you know the word count on it?
Well, here's the funny thing. When I initially released it in 2005, it was initially 235,000 words.
That's a lot of words.
And so what I did when I did the revision, I shaved off 50,000 words.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's better now because now it's one part is 109,000, the other is 91.
Oh,
that's
good,
pretty
yeah.
good. For the genre, that's excellent.
Good manageable chunks.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you split them, does the first book have a beginning and a conclusion, then goes into the second book, or is it cliffhanger second book?
It's kind of like conclusion, kind of cliffhanger-ish.
Okay.
Where it's kind of it's a good end point, and a lot of the dramatic tension, kind of okay, it builds to that point, boom, but it's kind of there's a great kind of cliffhanger, and then that leads perfectly into the next book.
Fantastic. With the 3rd book, did you have the 3rd book planned already before you finished the first one, or was it the second one, kind of when you already had the first one?
Well, here's the interesting thing. The 3rd book, actually, I've had that written for a number of years. It was kind of the interesting thing is, when I was writing the first book, or the first 2 books, it was basically, my whole thing was just okay, do I have more than these books in me? That's always the one, when you start writing
Yeah.
the book, it's like, I have more than this in me.
Right.
And then I think once I started editing, that's when I was just like, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do
Yeah.
this. And then all these ideas just started flowing. I was like, oh, this is awesome. And
Then you're like,
that's
how am I going to stop?
Yeah.
I need to
Exactly.
out of
Yeah.
control.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
like
that's
that.
basically kind of what happened. Yeah, it was like, oh my goodness, like, and another thing I actually do is I do a lot of short stories on the side because just like these little tiny things. Okay, wouldn't really make sense to add this to a book, but let me actually write a little side story. And the great things about those, like doing short stories, is it allows you to kind of get to know your characters in ways you didn't realize.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
oh, this character kind of snuck up on me. I didn't realize they was going to go this direction. And it also makes you a better editor for yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's one thing that helped me when I started doing revisions, is that I kind of, even though I'm not part of the SWGA or at all, but they have kind of guidelines in terms of, okay, this is how long a short story is, this is how long a novelette is, this is how long a novella is. So with a short story, anything 7,500 words or less. So I try to make sure all my short stories are shorter than that. And from there, it's kind of like, then I kind of translate that into book writing. It's like, okay, let me make sure these chapters aren't like out of control in their length. Maybe they're at most 3,500 words, maybe 45 or 5,000. But it kind of helps where it's like the chapters are shorter. The person doesn't feel like, oh my goodness, this chapter won't end. So,
Well, yeah, and I when I go back and do editing, I recently edited a longish project for me, and every now and then you get one of those chapters, like, you look and you check the word count on it, you're like, oh my God,
yes.
this is way longer than the one before it. Is that okay?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I used to try to make them more even, but now I let some be shorter than others.
Yeah, and that was something that I really enjoyed. Like I read, it was like last year I read the book Leviathan Wakes, and even though it's like a 560-page book, all the chapters are like no longer than like 12 pages.
Right.
Right.
And it was just like, that's something.
the book
That's something
moving.
better. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's an audio book, so I guess I didn't see it visually on that. But yeah, it did move along fairly well. We've talked about Leviathan Wakes and the Expanse series a couple of times on the show for various reasons. So.
Yes.
I'd like to get into your process a little later into the show.
That's always my favorite part of the show.
Before we get into that, before we get all the secrets, what kind of inspired you to create this book? And with that, tell us a little bit about it. Let's talk about some of the characters and what makes you excited about this book.
Sure. So basically, I'll start with probably just about the book. So about the book, it was essentially takes place about 400 years in the future, in the beginning of the 25th century, and humanity is humanity is not at war with an alien species. They're part of a massive star-spanning government, or as I call it, a hyperpower, because they have access to hyperspace.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I like it.
And so,
like that.
and it's called the government's called the Galactic Union of Planetary Republics, or the Galactic Union. And basically, its military arm is called the Union Command Armada, and Star Brigade, or Strategic Assault and Reconnaissance Brigade, they are just kind of like they're part of the, as I call it, the JSOG. It's like JSOC, but like, Joint Special Ops Group.
Yeah.
And so they're basically deal with extraordinary terrorist threats. They're a counter-terrorist team. And for lack of a better term, it's kind of like X-Men with aliens in space. That's basically kind of what they are in the military.
That's very cool.
That's a good tagline. I think if you
I like
give
that.
an elevator pitch there, if you're at a conference and you want to snag yourself an agent or editor, that probably went to me.
Yeah, because for me, kind of dovetailing in kind of inspiration, I was a huge X-Men fan growing up. Like right around when I moved to California, one of the things I got into was comic books back then. And
So favorite X-Man character?
there's so many.
Which on the spot. See?
I liked Wolverine until he became too oversaturated.
Yeah.
He was like everywhere. But it's kind of X-Men was a huge inspiration, and it was also around that same time I started getting into Star Trek, like TNG, not necessarily.
Yeah, not the original.
Not the original. TNG and Deep Space Nine, and also Babylon 5. So that was just this confluence of inspirations that helped kind of inspire the characters. But yeah, basically, when we meet Star Brigade in the first book, essentially Star Brigade is kind of on the verge of being decommissioned. A lot of its seasoned, veteran operatives have kind of been poached by other military divisions. So there's probably like maybe 2 seasoned operatives left, and you have just a bunch of like untested rookies, and a lot of that had a lot of greenhorns, and a lot of it kind of attributed.
What could possibly go wrong?
I know, exactly, and a lot of that came from there was this mission a year before the events of the book that just went disastrously wrong. It was an ambush basically on 2 teams, one of them being the main character, and just like those 2 teams in that ambush just got obliterated, and the main character and one other character survived. And that was it. And aside from that, he also suffered a personal tragedy that essentially left him a widower and a single father.
Oh, wow.
So he just kind of had to peace out, and he's just like, he didn't necessarily resign, but he's just like, I'm taking a sabbatical, I don't know when I'm going to be back.
Yeah.
Because like one thing I noticed with, there are certain stories where it's like if the hero basically suffers a personal tragedy, he's like at the, pardon my French, the ass end of the galaxy, drinking himself to oblivion.
Yep.
Hasn't shaved in like years, has like a total hobo beard of sadness, and I was just like, let's not do
I like that beard.
Yeah, the single dad thing is probably pretty new and uncharted territory in science fiction. That's pretty cool.
So, and the thing about him is that since he was he was a military guy, a lot of times he was kind of like the backup parent. He wasn't there as much as he'd like to be, so now he has to be. He's the only parent. So now he has to kind of be there for his son and really get to know his son. And what happens is that, again, don't want to give too much away, but something calls him back into duty.
Of
and
course.
So he has to balance fatherhood with his responsibilities, and also there's a duty to his friendship with the person who calls him back, who's the other lone survivor of that
very
massacre.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's we've talked about that before too, as well. Is that what makes stories good? Really, when it gets down to it, a lot of times is characters making hard decisions.
Exactly.
You got to put them in a tough spot. You can't make it easy on them. So that would make for some tough decisions to be made.
Exactly, and also the fact is that he doesn't, he's rookies. He doesn't know them. They know of him. Like he kind of has a bit of a status because before even he joined Star Brigade, like years before, he was a war hero in another war, and he was he was a fighter pilot. So there's that experience that comes into it. So he's kind of like a legend in that, where he was a POW, and he was also, he has a kind of there's a reputation that comes with him that he has to bear, but he doesn't. His default setting isn't stoic all the time. He has emotion.
Right. So this might be a kind of a random question. You said fighter pilot, or are you talking like the terrestrial fighter pilot, or like in space fighter pilot, or is there a differentiation?
Yeah, it's space fighter pilot. Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
He's basically he's in the Galactic Union's version of the Air Force, which is called the Aero Fleet.
Okay.
And he's in kind of the fighter, like he's in part of. Actually, he was in the special division of that too, of fighter pilots that kind of dealt with. I forgot the name. I know that the acronym is like SOCOs or something like that. But you saw that. You saw that already.
SOCOs lead the way. Something like that.
So he basically,
go ahead.
So he basically was kind of. There's a lot that has to do with that, and it was after that war. That's when he was kind of like, okay, I want to do something else, and then he was recruited to Star Brigade.
So you mentioned that this series, this universe takes place with humanity kind of spread among the stars, and they have the hyperspace travel technology and that kind of thing. We talked yesterday about how space opera, military science fiction has kind of been saturated with one type of plot, and that is these all-powerful aliens are coming to destroy us, and we have to fight them off.
One man,
one ship. And so you kind of went in a different direction here with this series, which I find intriguing and refreshing. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, you mentioned that yesterday and not having the aliens, but you also mentioned the Harry Potter series as kind of a inspiration for the series. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So basically, one of the things I really wanted to do was, I kind of, just to quote, J.R.R. Tolkien, I wanted to write a sci-fi series that I would want to read. And with kind of like what you mentioned, I noticed that I didn't even realize that was a thing. Like when I developed Star Brigade, like I hadn't really read a lot of military sci-fi, but I remember when I was kind of, okay, I'm doing the Kindle thing now, I kind of started looking through, okay, who are some of the top authors in the genre, and I was noticing like, okay, that's the same as that. I'm not saying, and this is not, knocking anyone. I just noticed that there was a similitude in terms of like, okay,
right,
alien invasion, Earth is about to be destroyed. Alien invasion, Earth is about to be destroyed. And I was like, okay, I'm
movies too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's Star Brigade, and just to talk about where humanity is. So humanity, it's interesting because there's different in this Star Brigade universe. There's different types of humans. There's Earth humans, and essentially, Earth basically has a power base on a Earth-like planet. So, and they have colonies as well. But there's also different types of humans. Like for instance, there's Crimson-born humans, there's Storm-born humans, and basically they didn't originate from Earth. They all kind of came from their other planets. It's just there happened to be like 98, 99% similar to like Earth humans.
So yeah, and I got to the Crimson world humans, or the Crimson humans.
Crimson-born, yeah.
Yeah.
So they originated from Earth?
They're actually not colonists that have been there. They're actually from there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
and that's the thing with the main character. The main character is actually half Earth human or half Earthborn, and half Circadian human or half Crimson-born. And the reason why it's called Crimson-born is because essentially their planet looks like, not all of it looks like this, but a good portion of their planet looks like essentially Sedona or like southern Utah.
Okay.
So that's one of the, and so there's a lot of red rocks, a lot of just crazy like Bryce Canyon like
that'd be cool.
formations over there. Yeah. So that was kind of the thing where the Crimson-born came from. And actually, funny enough, that inspiration in terms of calling them a Crimson-born, Storm-born, that actually I got that from A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Love that. Yeah. Love that series.
Yeah. Oh, the series is fantastic. So basically about the Harry Potter thing, I'll dovetail back into that. So when I was initially developing the series, it was I could tell the storytelling, how I was doing it was very comic book influence. And again, I didn't know how to write a book at that time. I was just learning. It was like 2000, 2001. And then what happened is I kept hearing about Harry Potter. This is before the movies. It was just word of mouth. Like everyone was talking about this boy wizard, and I was just like, finally, let me just read this thing. It's to the point where I'm just like, let me just buy it. Because if something is that popular, there has to be a reason behind it. Let me check.
Right.
So
I read Twilight for the same reason. Sorry.
No, I did too. I was curious. I did.
I'm going to mute Scott because of that comment. We're going to mute that.
Yeah, you can edit that out later. Scott read Twilight.
But basically, I finally bought one of the books, and I accidentally bought the third book instead of the first book. But I was just like, you know what? If this is any good, it'll stand on its own. So I finished it in like 4 days. And again, I'm a slow reader, so I was just like, holy crap. I just devoured it. And I was so blown away by how good it was, how well it was written, how engaging the characters were, and also her storytelling is so masterful, how she'll put all these little Easter eggs, red herrings, all these things that you don't really notice until you get to the climax or the terminus point of the story, and you're just like, whoa!
Yeah.
My mind was blown.
Yeah,
and I think, yeah, exactly. And then it was just, from that point, I was just like, I need to follow that type of storytelling. Like, that's the stuff that intrigues me. And so that's when I really started to dig deeper into my characters and just to make sure that the plot had more meaning. It wasn't just like, kind of like a comic book. You read it one week and you forget it. And I wanted it to be like something that stays with people and something that builds upon a series and a universe and a mythos.
Something that I read in one of my writing books talked about having resonance with your books and your endings, so that on the experience of reading it and kind of stays with you. And there's several books I have like that. But I look back at my reading log of all the stuff I've read over the last 5 years or so when I started keeping track. And there's a lot of books in there. I'm like, what? I hope nobody asked me about that book, because I'd be hard-pressed to go beyond a very general understanding of it. But yeah, but some books really do stay with you.
Well, and since we're talking about Harry Potter and how books stay with you, I've read that series twice all the way through, and I've listened to the audiobooks as well. And for me, that series, when you get past the first 3.5 books is when I think the story really takes off and becomes a good story. Because the first 3 books are kind of just a lead up. I mean, if you want to look at the overall series, the first 3 books are just kind of an introduction to the world, and then once you hit the Goblet of Fire, that book is where the actual story really takes off, and you really start to get into what is actually going on.
Actually, I will say this. I think the 3rd book is actually where that starts.
You know what? I'll agree with you. With Peter Pettigrew and all that stuff with the backstory that goes on along with that, yeah, you're absolutely right. But once you get into the overall story, like 6 and 7 are probably my favorite books, and 6 is probably my number 1 favorite book, just because you learn so much about Snape, and so much about, and actually you could look at it and say that the entire story is about Snape, but that's a completely different episode. But
yeah, save it for the next episode.
But that type of storytelling and that series, and there's several series that do this, but they hit home because they're not cardboard characters.
No.
The depth of the characters is so vast that you can read the story and say, holy crap, this guy that I thought was the bad guy the entire time and I couldn't stand and I hated, when you finish 6, you love Snape. And
I don't know about that. I liked him more. But it's just like, you still treated a little boy like crap for his father's sins, and he never even knew his father. So
I'll give you that.
It's the same reason that Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire is, because there's a lot of bad people in there that you kind of can't totally hate, because every now and then they do something. I remember I went through it 3 times, the Game of Thrones, and I remember reading one time and thinking I liked Sandor Clegane, and then I went back and I read it, and I was reading it, and then I met Sandor Clegane for the first time. I was like, God, this guy is bad. He killed Butcher Boy. He needs to go. But at some point, like when he was trying to stick up for Sansa and stuff, you thought, he's going to stick up for people when other people wouldn't.
Right.
He doesn't care about this, the knights and all that. He does what his own moral code, which is a terrible moral code, but he will stand up for the underdog when nobody else will.
And like Jamie, like you said, like Jamie Lannister, the same thing. You saw that he actually did a really good thing because somebody had to kill the Mad King.
Right.
He's probably got the most. Yeah, he's probably got the most complete story arc, I think, Jamie Lannister, as far as going from terrible to sympathizable.
And it makes sense because, like, over the years, it's like, he's been hated and derided for something he did, which saved millions of people. So he was just like, screw everyone else. I just care about my family. Granted, it led him to do terrible things.
Oh, yeah.
But, and also the fact that he was so devoted to his sister when she was just, awful.
She didn't deserve.
Yeah, exactly. And then even kind of going back to it, one of the things is the book shows you exactly who these people are. Like, it started in the beginning of the series, it shows you exactly who these people are and what their mindset is and how prepared they are right in the first book. Yeah. And then a lot of it just kind of gets amplified. Like with Robb, you knew he wasn't ready to be a leader yet.
Right.
He had all his good qualities, but then you threw him out into the field and all his faults, all his flaws, like in terms of, like, he had all the martial stuff down. He had the battle commander, but when it came to just being a leader, he was ill-prepared.
Right.
And it's kind of like you adapt or you die. Like you said, Game of Thrones, you win or you die, and that's the thing. And
so that's the thing. I was going to say, so with your characters that you've created, do you have that built into your character, those type of arcs, and do you have a favorite character that you've written, or one that stands out to you that's not necessarily the good guy, but just one that you love writing above all the rest of them?
Yes. So I'd say with my characters, I definitely make sure that while they have arcs and there's growth and there's changes, but they still are who they are. It's like they don't get like a brain transplant. Probably one of my favorite characters to write is, and I think Scott might have read about this one already. I like writing this one character named Samantha Dursa. She basically is she is the kind of friend of the main character, and she's kind of like, the thing about her is that she's got a lot of interesting backstory. Like she's a former Black Ops spy, and she's currently the spy master, or like kind of the head of the intelligence division for Star Brigade.
I
So
haven't got to Samantha yet, but I'll look forward to meeting her.
yeah, she's probably one of my favorite characters to write.
Yeah.
That, and I'd say I really like writing their relationship. Like, actually, the main character, I should probably say his name, Habram and Wosu. And that will lead me to another discussion of something else. But basically, Habram and Sam, I love writing their relationship because there's just so much complexity to it, and there's clearly an undercurrent of something, which I don't want to spoil this for.
Spoilers!
Spoiler alerts! Spoilers everywhere. So what's your favorite method of revealing your characters? Through dialogue, through backstory, through some other magical thing that we'd all like to share?
I think I like dialogue, but I also like backstory. I like exposition, but not like an exposition dump, where it's kind of like if you're able to find a way to weave it into the present-day storytelling. Because I think that's an art, and it's something I'm still trying to perfect. But
I read something real quick that you mentioned exposition. I read something yesterday that talked about that, and basically the rule of thumb that she had was in the first 50 pages you can have 3 paragraphs of exposition, and you can do that in any way you want. You can do it in like a sentence for every couple pages, or you can do like a paragraph, then go for 10 pages and do another paragraph of like backstory or whatever, and weave it in wherever you're writing at. And so that will keep your narrative info dump down, but also allow you to provide backstory and stuff for your characters that you need in the story. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, because the very first version of the book had these like 2 or 3 chapters, which were kind of training those, because I still at that point I was still learning how to write like in long form, and it didn't really work out. I remember like one of the things that I kept getting from like everyone, whether it be like friends, family, people who read the book, they hated those chapters. So when I did the revisions, I completely eliminated them and just kind of interwove them into the fabric of the story, and it worked better. And I felt so much more confident as a writer at that point, so I was just kind of like, okay, I can do this.
Well, and Scott and I,
feedback, though, because if beta readers and having people that will give you useful feedback is not actually that easy, so that's really
right. And Scott and I have talked about that before. With your first draft, you've got to tell yourself the story. So telling yourself or doing all that backstory or narrative summary or exposition or whatever you want to call it, that's okay in the first draft. And then once you know what your characters are doing, you can take sometimes 2 or 3 pages of backstory or character notes or whatever you have, and you can, if you're good at it, you can condense that down into a 1-sentence boom, and it makes your story that much cleaner and that much better, because the reader's smart. They don't need a roadmap to say A, B, and C. They can see C and know how A and B happened.
Exactly. And another thing too, it's one thing about, and this is just a small little side about the characters, particularly more so the human characters, is one thing I like. So, and this actually weaves into the whole overall fabric of kind of how I wanted to approach the science fiction was, and I was looking more at the visual medium. There's a lot of just tropes and cliches in science fiction that I was just like, why do you do that? Don't do that. Or like, why do everyone in the future? Why is everyone wearing like robes? Why is everyone wearing these stuffy robes? I'm like, go for comfort. Or
why the least practical thing you could wear in space is a robe.
Or pajamas like Star Trek.
Exactly. Or why is it that people talk so stuffy and declarative? Why is it that if you have an alien species, they all look the same? It's just like there should be ethnicities, subspecies within an alien species.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like the Klingon, cliche, where all the Klingons look the same and all their skin tones are the same, and the only difference you ever see is maybe the head bone is different, but but like Romulans and Vulcans, they all look the same. Bajorans all look the same with their little nose thing, and you're right. The only difference in the whole series is humans, where you have the eclectic crew. But then when you look at everybody else, they all look the same, and you're absolutely right. That annoys the crap out of me.
Like one of the things, like one of the characters in the book is kind of a more feline species, and I showcase some other people within his species, like whether they be senators or whatnot, and they look completely different from him. Some of them are not as tall, some of them are not as built, And also, another big thing too is having aliens be in the forefront and not just having them be window dressing. That's something that, as much as I love Star Wars is like 100% guilty of doing that, where the aliens are never in the centerpiece. Like, humans are just one species in like thousands, maybe tens of thousands in this galaxy.
Absolutely.
And they're the only ones who get the love. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And another
except for the Ewoks. Ewoks got the
the Ewoks.
And see how that went. No.
That's the second mute that Scott earned. Let's mute him again.
I'm like probably the only person who I actually like the Ewoks, so give me a break.
Ridiculous. Well, now that we talked about your story a little bit, let's talk about a little bit of craft, and I'd like to segue. I'd like to segue into that a little bit.
Ewoks, really?
And, no. We're going to leave it on Ewoks and take it right out.
There's also another little thing I wanted to talk to you about the humans.
Oh, yeah,
sure,
go ahead.
It was, since humans are in space, I'm like, aren't they going to acclimate their names to space-type names? Oh, yeah. And so that's something I tried to do, and I actually have, the main character actually kind of makes fun of that. He's just like, ugh, I can't stand that. Because, you have people named, like there's a guy named Atom, and he pronounces it Atom with a T and an O. Atom. And somebody named Starla, or somebody named like Jovian,
Yeah.
And these are common names now. These are as common as like Stephanie, Jeremy, or Bill, these types of names. So they're like completely integrated. And you're going to see a Venus around there, and you're going to see a human with kind of like body modifications and like doing all weird stuff to themselves to make them closer to the cosmic.
Yeah, I mean,
Comet, yes. They're going to see people named Comet, yes.
Gas Cloud, my personal favorite.
No, but that's good though. But that actually segues into the craft, because that's good world building. That's good. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily give the story any more to the plot, but it definitely goes to world building, and that you've thought about that kind of stuff, which I think a lot of naming problems that I see in fantasy and in science fiction is, in fantasy, all the names are like ridiculously sound like long names.
And pronounce that.
And see, that's why I like Martin's names, because they're easy. John, Bran, like they're very simple. They're not nicknames out there. They
have nicknames for the long names too. Like, for instance, Daenerys, she's Dany. Eddard, he's Ned. Brandon, he's Bran.
Right. And what is interesting is, because I did all the audiobooks for that series, is that I think Tom Lee does book 4, and rather than Roy Dotrice, and so he pronounces all the names a little bit different, which took some getting used to.
Yeah.
So like Peter versus Pater and all some things like that.
But like in science fiction books, they all have kind of those evolved, longish, fantasy-ish names.
Lots of consonants and stuff in there.
Yeah, that irritates me a little bit. But like what you're talking about, that's actually a good idea to take that civilization, push it forward a couple hundred years, and what's going to be the norm there? They're not going to revert to like 1800 or 1500-year-old names. They're going to go to the newer names. They're going to go to
forward.
Right.
Yes.
I like that.
Will they even know what a smith is?
Yeah, exactly.
Who's a smith? What's a smith? Yeah. That's just a weird, archaic name. I guess they did it to make metal or something. I don't know.
And then there was actually, it kind of goes to what you're saying. There was a character named Thridney in the story, and that was an interesting kind of combo where I got that from a mixture of I think there's a star system, like a real star system called Eurydice. And then there's this character in, do you guys remember that series X-Man? He was kind of like a alternate universe Cable. He came from the Age of Apocalypse. Yeah, exactly. So her name was Threnody, and I was just like, ooh, I just kind of merged the two together. And then even just kind of inspiration for getting that name that looked differently than it was actually spelled, that came from actually Hermione.
Oh, nice.
Harry Potter. Yeah. Because I remember I didn't know how to pronounce Hermione until somebody archly corrected me.
Oh, yeah. Everybody has their first time they had to pronounce Hermione. Unless you're from
exactly.
That's not how you say it.
So what was the character name? Yeah, what was the character name you said? Threadney?
Thridney.
Thridney. I like that. It has some resonance. It kind of, it's deep. I like it.
So how much world building did you do before you? I mean, do you do world building as you write, or did you do it all before?
I did a lot of it before, but a lot of it did come as I was writing. Actually, there's some where it's just kind of like I'd see something that inspired me, or I thought, oh, this would work better if I did that. So it was kind of just like I had a base set of world building where it's just like, okay, I want this, this, and this, and then again, like kind of, I think I was mentioning this to Scott earlier, where when I started making it more military, more of a military sci-fi, not just space opera and comics in space,
Right.
it was like, okay, let me add more of a layer of military and show that, okay, this is where Star Brigade is. This is who, like, the Star Brigade's kind of almost commanding officer is outside of Star Brigade. And even just when I was coming up with the worlds, I wanted to make sure, like, this was something else that, another sci-fi trope I wanted to make sure of. If they visit a planet, even if it's just for a little bit, this planet has its own character and its own identity. You actually get a sense that it's not just, it doesn't feel like you're in a city. It feels like this is a world. This is a world that has different textures, different environments, different climates. And even, you know, another thing that's coming in the next Star Brigade book that I'm going to release in August, one of the species they encounter is this very tribal species, and even amongst them, there's variations in terms of where they live. There's people who live in the mountains. There's people who live in, like, these exchange kind of cliffs. There's people who live near the coast, you know, and they have different customs, different traditions, different mores. Even if they're linked by, like, a common religion, there's still variations depending on the planet that they live.
You keep track of everything in some sort of spreadsheet or notebook or whiteboard or some
kind of, sort of
notes, write it on your hand like I do.
I have some of it written down, but a lot of it's in my head.
Yeah. I listened to a guy's talk. He's a science fiction writer named Mel Odom. He's written a lot of books, and he talks about world building. Some people build the world out, like say you store your characters on the coast of some planet, and you build just enough for the world for them to operate, and then you build out from there. And then some people build the whole world, and then right in the world. So I didn't know if that's, if that's something you would do one or the other.
I straddle the line there where it's like I do build the world out, but then I also kind of, as the books kind of expand when needs be, it's like I kind of build like, okay, they're going to be visiting this place. What's going to be here? What's going to be the thing that they encounter? And most importantly, don't just build the world and, hey, it looks fancy and pretty. It's like have them live in that world.
Yeah.
Right.
I was talking with Josh about this yesterday, where one movie that does that really well was, even though it might not be the most popular movie, Eon Flux. I love the fact that there's these cool things that they lived in that world. Like, character she got her feet turned into hands because it made her a better light so you could run around. And there was also this cool kind of liquid pool that was actually a view screen where you could communicate with somebody. I'm like, that's awesome. That's the type of world building where it's not just there to look fancy, like, say, you know, Chronicles of Riddick, where great world building, the world looked awesome, but, you know, do they really live in it?
Yeah.
You make a visual world, you know, is probably easier to make than a functional.
Exactly.
World. And then one other question that I wrote down because I wanted not to forget it. This is something I struggle with a lot. Is so when you're world building, how did you deal with? And Josh probably knows this better than me because he has some military background. But I struggle with rank structures and military structure and command things. So that's very important to a lot of readers. It's for your authenticity. So how did you deal with that?
I did research. That was one of the best things. I kind of just researched. I hope it's as accurate. That's the one thing. Like, I tried to make it as accurate as I could. Hopefully it is. And again, I'm sure it varies between whether somebody's like, you know, civilian personnel or, you know, full-on military personnel or just within whichever armed force division that they're in. I tried to just make something that was like, okay, you start off as an ensign, then you're a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, commander, captain, colonel, and then, you know, for instance, one thing that, you know, the main character finds himself in is that he's not just a they won't give him the rank of a colonel, but they make him still like the brigade executive officer. That was actually something I added recently where it's just like, let me make it where it's like he's the executive officer. I didn't want to call him the senior executive officer because, you know, acronym that's like SEO. I'm like, that's already another term. That's a search term.
Right.
So, let me make it actually sound functional and not sound, you know, pokey when you actually kind of, if you want to acronym.
I know ultimately, you know, when you create a world, any writer, that you get to make it the way you want it. But so I've always wanted to do that. am a rehabilitated or partially rehabilitated, maybe a little recidivistic seat of the pants rider. So sometimes I get myself way out in front.
Nice.
I'm like, put the cart before the horse. I don't even know where the horse is.
He didn't even have the cart. He was just like, I'm just going to put this right here. I don't have a horse or a cart, but they're both out of order.
So I do some more planning now and research, but sometimes I just go crazy with wherever the story goes.
And sometimes, you know what I do with that, I do that with my short stories. I do less planning when I do short stories. With like anything novella or longer, that's when I kind of, and it was funny because when I first started writing Star Brigade, I knew what I wanted to do, but I just started writing, and I do not recommend that at all because it was it's such a painful and hard process that literally I stopped halfway through the book and I just outlined everything, and then I started again, and it was so much easier.
Right.
Sooner or later, you're going to plan it. Whether your planning is writing an outline or whether your planning is writing 15 drafts, you're going to decide, do I have enough time to write this thing from scratch over and over again? The problem is I love to write that way, but if you have to start from the beginning and write the story over and over again, you lose your
momentum,
engagement, your momentum, and you get bored with it. You can only write about so many times before you're just it's not as cool as the first time.
But I think one of the things that's great about having an outline is you have, it's almost kind of like that magic feather that Dumbo had, where you have this foundation, you know exactly, okay, this is my foundation, this is where I can jump off. You don't have to look at it all the time, but you know it's there, and you know exactly what you put down, because there's a lot of specifics and little pedantic things that you didn't think about. It's like, oh wow, I should probably make sure that's fleshed out. And then what's even better, and this is probably one of my favorite parts of writing, is like when you really get into it, and then you're going through and you're following the outline, and then you get to a part where you're just like, you know what, maybe I should do this. It's like, this doesn't feel right anymore, depending on where the story's taking you. And then you kind of just go in a completely different direction, but you have that outline as to jump off.
And you might never got to that point without the outline to get you that far.
Exactly.
And then you can say, I'm going to turn on left at Albuquerque.
And I think with the outline, having one, even if it's just a brief noting of how you're going to go, that for me, that helps a lot for not having writer's block, because even if you get to a scene where you're sitting at the page and you know what you have to write, but you're like, I don't know how to do this, you can, instead of wasting your time staring at that blank screen trying to figure out how to do that one part, you can look at your outline and go, I know what I want to write for this part, I'm going to go write that part. And while you're writing that part, I mean, it happens to me, I'm sure it happens to everybody else, while you're writing that other part, somewhere in the back of your head, you figure out how to fix that other part, and then you can make a note of that or put that on your outline or whatever and come back to it later.
Yes, and the great thing about it is that once you have that outline, you start to trust yourself more. So when you kind of realize, oh, maybe I should try this, you start trusting yourself, you start becoming more confident.
Absolutely.
And you also, it's good to kind of do a little bit of a cartwheel, because you're just like, wow, that was really cool, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah. And then when it all comes together, you're like, ah, ha, ha!
Yes, aha, you have a eureka moment.
Yeah.
But one thing I'm actually trying to do, because this is something that was a bit of an issue, I'm a bit of a slow writer. So one thing, I think it might have been either J.N. Chaney or I think maybe Richard Fox might have sent this my way. Chris Fox's book about 5,000 words in an hour.
Right.
And it's this kind of thing, this method where, hey, time yourself, block out any distractions, do these sprints. And so I've started actually doing that, and I'm starting to see a lot of good results. So the great thing is, by the time I start writing my, the fourth Star Brigade book, it'll be like, okay, I'll be able to get that done a lot quicker, because it took me a bit to write the first three. But I'm just like, I know that if this is something I want to be doing, in the future, this is something I want to be doing like full time, I can't be taking more than 2 years to write a book.
Yeah, we can't all be George R. R. Martin.
What's your
as far as our production schedule?
What's your normal word count like in a day? Do you have a goal that you set every day, or do you just kind of sit down and have you have a scene or something that you want to write? What's your process like?
Well, one thing I'm trying to do now that I'm implementing the sprints, I try to make where it's like, okay, I time a sprint. I try to do write in the morning and in the evening. Like I try to write the big story, like for instance a novella, I try to do that in the morning, and then I'll do the short story in the evening. And right now I'm at 10, because with the Chris Fox method, it's kind of like you start small. You start with like 5 minutes, 5 minute sprints.
Yeah.
And then now I'm at 10 minutes. And what I want to try and do is get to, okay, let me hit 400 words in these 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And then once I get there, then I'll graduate to 15 minutes. But the interesting thing is, because of this, I write a lot more than I used to, because you do the 10 minutes, and then you kind of go back, because the thing about it, you just write. You don't even go back to edit. You just write.
Yeah.
And then so I go back and clean up stuff, and then I start adding little things like, okay, this needs to be fleshed out. And then I end up with like almost like sometimes 1,000 words.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so
that's why if you meet people that say I could never write, well, what they really mean is that they're afraid if they write something, it's not going to be perfect the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And you did some sketching.
That's okay.
You know that when you are sketching, you have that kind of crazy fast light where you're not going real dark with the outlines, and then you start filling in and it develops. But you don't try to draw that face or the character or the background perfect the first time, because that'll take you like 25 years to finish one frame of your comic book, and you got to go faster. Get out of your own way, I guess, is another thing. I really like his book. This show actually kind of came a little bit from writing sprints, because Josh and I would meet and do writing sprints, and we talked about writing so much, finally we just said, let's just do a show.
And it's great because we get to get authors on and get re-energized, as it were, every week. We talk to a different author, or coming up this month we've got a couple editors coming on the show. And for me personally, talking to people who are excited about their work and like to talk about it, like Scott and I like to talk about it. It gets me re-innovated for the week to sit down and write and do that kind of thing. The other day, I tested out voice dictation on my computer. I had one full day where I didn't have any distractions, and I got almost 5,000 words that day.
I got to try that. I hear that's really awesome.
You know, I don't like doing it when you're writing an actual narrative draft. It slows me down. But for the latest novel that I'm working on, Edge of Valor, I decided to try to do my story beats or my expanded outline with voice dictation, so I don't have to do quotes or have like set dialogue or anything like that. Now I talk it out and I have a whole bunch of stuff in there, but when I go back and clean it, then I might do the hand typing, do quotation marks and he said, she said, and all that stuff. But just to keep it a very down and dirty, and just to get the story down, it was. I mean, I can talk here and I'm talking, I don't know how many words a minute, but it's way faster than typing.
Yeah, that's my problem. I really like it. I like voice dictation for the narrative, and I initially tried it years ago as an exercise. I'm like, well, you write subtly different when you're typing than when you're writing with a pen on paper. And I thought, well, I'm going to try to, as a mental exercise, do some voice dictation and see if I can, turn off my self-editor and go. And when I voice dictate, I write so much, I produce so much, it'd take me 100 years to edit it. I mean, it'll be just crazy amounts, and that's kind of my front. And then there's some silly stuff with some of my science fiction names that the voice dictation tries to make them.
Like the thing about it is, like for that, because a lot of times one of the things I do is that when I step away from writing, and then I'm like, let's say I'm driving, and then I just start coming up with these ideas or coming up with these string of dialogue, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could write this down. But that's something I'm going to have to start doing. I remember that was mentioned. I've mentioned a couple times, and I'm like, I'm going to have to start doing that.
I know with Dragon Dictation, and I haven't tried it. If you have the right voice recorder, you can voice dictate, and then you can go home and plug the voice recorder in, and it'll shoot it out as words.
I've tried to do that with just the iPhone app, and a lot of times when I'm driving and I have an idea, I'll just voice memo myself and record it and then type it out later. But I know one of my goals this year is to get one of those recorders that works with Dragon Dictate or just a normal dictation program anyway, that you can voice memo yourself and then plug it in, and it will transcribe everything that you've said and put it into a written format.
I'm going to hire a typist to follow me every place I go. Hang on. Take this down. This is brilliant.
Write that down. and they have the stenograph machine just typing away on some like hover round wheelchair that they're.
That's funny you
on.
mentioned that. I went to the Smarter Artist Summit, and they had a stenographer there, and
Nice.
And so she was doing the what do you call that when you type the words up? The closed caption. So I was the first conference I've ever been to where up on the screen they had closed caption of what was being said.
Oh, that's very cool.
And she would cruise along, and it turned out she was also a writer. And he must crank some words out with that thing.
Well,
but it takes a long time to learn, apparently. But.
Yeah, it's kind of like shorthand. But we're coming up on the hour, so we need to start wrapping it up a little bit. There's 2 questions that I wanted to get from you. The first one is, well, actually, there's 3. The first one is
3 questions. Five questions.
5 questions. Knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently starting out?
I think starting out, I don't know what I'd change starting out, because at that point, like ebooks weren't even really a thing. They were just less. Hey, they're a PDF. They weren't profitable.
Right.
So I mean, if there's one thing, I probably wouldn't have done print on demand. Yeah, because that's not really ideal anymore.
It's a huge time and money sink.
Oh my goodness.
For not a whole lot of return.
Absolutely. Especially given like you have to overprice your books because the print costs are so high. So like I'd probably not do print on demand. But it was a learning experience. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So the second question is, and I think we're going to add this to our show if it works out.
Sure.
And if it doesn't, then you'll be the only person that we ask this question to.
Awkward.
Yeah. Out of all the books that you've read, what book that hasn't been made into a movie would you like to see made into a movie?
That's a really good question.
I just thought of it this morning.
I'd say.
I got one if you.
Oh, actually, can it be like it hasn't been made into a good movie?
It can be any book.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd say if there's one book that I wish was made into a really, really, really good movie, or even just a miniseries, I'd say it's Queen of the Damned.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Queen of the Damned was such a good book, and the movie was so awful, and it didn't do justice to the book.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So if people were wanting to track you down and find out about you and your books, how would they do?
Sure. They can find me on ccekeke.com, which is ccekeke.com. Or they can find me on Facebook. It's under CC Writer. That's my Facebook fan page. And that's also where you can find the Summer of Sci-Fi. You can join, and you can RSVP.
Find all kinds of good books to get this summer.
Exactly. Or you can find me, like, I'm all over social media, so you can find me CC Instagram. I recently finally started using that. Twitter. So, but yeah, I'd say the main part where you can find me is probably ccekeke.com.
Awesome.
Good deal.
Well, thanks for coming on the show and dealing with our scheduling issues. This last-minute show was kind of hectic to throw up, but it was great to have you on. I enjoyed it a lot. Scott, do you have anything to add?
No, I was really glad that you're able to make it, and good to meet you. I had a good time. This has been a great episode. So.
Yeah, this is super fun. It was great. Thanks for having me. You guys are awesome, and thanks for having me on the show.
Oh yeah, we'll have to have you back on.
Have you back on our craft show we also do, where we just kind of it's like 3 of us all talking.
Sure, absolutely.
Books and stuff.
All right, well, CC, thanks for coming on the show. We really enjoyed it. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. You can check out all the past episodes on our website, keystrokemedium.com/live, and check out our book cracking. We've had some issues doing June's book of the month and getting that done. Hopefully we'll have Destroyer done and finished and on the website here over the next week, and then we're going to be changing the format, I think, a little bit for book cracking as it comes along in the next couple of months. But we've got some great...
Just so people don't leave a terrible open loop as far as the suspense thing, the reason it's not done is because every time we've done it, it's been like monsoon rainstorms, and it's like you're trying to watch Master and Commander and listen to a book review.
Really, if you wanted to hear what Scott's sump pump and my sump pump sound like in unison as like a musical band, listen to this episode. But that
very cutting edge.
It's great. But we've got a lot of great guests coming up this month and in August. So be sure you come back and join us for the subsequent episodes. Next week, if you're watching live, it's going to be Ernie Lindsay
Should be a good one.
coming on the show. That's going to be a great show. So, CC, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll see you guys later.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. Have a good day.
Thanks
Bye.
again.